She was dying beneath the sun when a Lakota warrior stopped to offer her water instead of death. What began as mercy became the kind of love that rebuilt two broken souls into a home. The sun had a cruel way of watching her, like it wanted to see how long she could last. Evelyn Hart moved through the empty plains with her hands outstretched, as if she could feel her way through the heat. Her shoes were gone somewhere behind her, torn from her feet when the wagon tipped, and now each step sank into dry sand that burned like fire. Her dress, once blue, was now a ragged gray thing clinging to her skin. She did not remember when she last drank water, only the taste of smoke and the sound of her father shouting her name before the gunfire drowned him out. Now even his voice was fading, swept away by the endless wind that carried dust and silence together. The land stretched wide around her, cruel and endless. The grass long dead from the summer sun, the air shimmering with heat. She didn't think any more about where she was going, only that she had to keep walking, because stopping meant remembering, and remembering hurt too much. Once she tried to say her name out loud, just to hear it again, but her throat was too dry. The word cracked in half before it reached her lips. So she kept walking, guided by nothing but the faint memory of direction, the way her father had once said the sunset where the rivers began. In the distance she saw a black line across the sky, and thought it was smoke, maybe another wagon, maybe people, maybe anything but this lonely stretch of nothing. She stumbled toward it, knees weak, vision blurring, the world swimming in and out of focus. When she fell, the ground met her face hard, the taste of dust filling her mouth. She stayed there a long time, cheek pressed to the earth, listening to the wind sigh like an old ghost. Somewhere, far away, a hawk cried, and she almost envied its wings. The night came slow, a bruised purple sinking over the plains, bringing a chill that bit through the thin fabric of her dress. She curled up by a fallen log, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the stars. Her mother used to say each one held a soul that had found peace, but Evelyn didn't see peace in their cold light, only distance. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she was too tired to care. She tried to pray, but the words stuck behind her teeth. When the morning came, the light was blinding, turning the world white and strange. She rose, unsteady, every muscle screaming, her hair tangled and full of dust. She walked again, because she didn't know what else to do. The horizon rippled like water, and for a moment she thought she saw movement, a shadow crossing between her and the Sunday. Maybe a man, maybe death itself. She didn't know. She just stood there, trembling, her lips parting to speak, but no sound came. The wind answered for her, whispering across the grass, carrying away what little of her name remained. The ground was rough beneath her palms, the dust so dry it felt like ash between her fingers. Evelyn's knees gave out beside the riverbed that hadn't seen water in weeks, only the cracked memory of it, deep grooves in the earth, like veins that had long stopped bleeding. She lay there for a moment, chest rising and falling in short, ragged breaths, the sun pressing its weight on her back until she could no longer tell if she was sweating or bleeding. Her lips were split, her eyes heavy. She thought maybe this was what dying felt like, quiet and slow, like being swallowed by the land itself. When the shadow crossed over her, she thought it was a vulture at first, circling to claim what was left. She didn't lift her head. It didn't matter anymore. But then the shadow didn't move, and the sound of hooves stopped close enough that she could feel the faint tremor in the ground. She turned her head slightly, the motion small, painful. What she saw made her stomach twist. A man sat tall on a painted horse, the sun behind him turning his outline to gold and darkness, all at once. Feathers tied in his hair caught the wind, his face calm, unreadable. The bow at his back glinted faintly. She thought of the stories her father told around the fire, about wild tribes who took scalps and spared no one. Fear clawed its way through her numbness, but even fear couldn't make her move. She lifted her head just enough to whisper, "Do it quick." the words scraped out like broken glass. The man didn't move. He dismounted slowly, his steps steady, his expression untouched by anger or cruelty. He crouched near her, close enough that she could see the leather of his leggings, the earth-stained moccasins, the steady rhythm of his breath. She waited for the blade, for the end, but instead, he reached behind him and pulled a small skin flask from his belt. When he held it out, she stared at it like it was a trick. His eyes met hers, dark and still as river stones, and after a long moment, she reached for it with trembling hands. The water hit her tongue like mercy. She coughed, half choking, half crying, unable to stop herself. He watched her drink, saying nothing, his face unreadable. When she tried to speak, to ask why, no sound came. He only nodded once and looked toward the horizon, where distant dust swirled like smoke. She didn't know what it meant, but the calm in his silence frightened her more than any weapon could have. When she finally looked up again, he was leading his horse closer, spreading a blanket on the ground, motioning for her to rest. She wanted to resist, to keep her pride, but her body had nothing left. As she sank onto the fabric, her last thought before sleep took her was simple and strange. Maybe death had a kinder face than she'd been told. The first thing she felt was heat, not the cruel sun this time, but the gentler kind that came from fire. Evelyn's eyelids fluttered, heavy as stone, and through the blur she saw orange light dancing on the cottonwood branches above her. The wind whispered through the leaves, soft and low, carrying the smell of smoke and something cooking, maybe meat. For a moment, she thought she was home again, that her mother would appear from behind the wagon with a tin plate in her hands, smiling the way she used to before everything went wrong. But then she heard a sound, low and steady, a language made of murmurs and pauses, and the dream broke apart. She turned her head and saw him, the man from the riverbed, crouched near the fire, his profile cut against the flames, strong and quiet. He had removed his weapons. They lay neatly beside him, bow, knife, and quiver stacked in order. He was stirring the fire with a stick, adding small branches one by one, his movements patient, unhurried. She tried to sit up, but pain rushed through her wrist and she gasped. Looking down, she saw a strip of clean cloth wrapped tight, tied with care. Someone had washed the blood from her skin. Her throat ached with thirst, but beside her sat her canteen, full again. The sight confused her more than it comforted. She did not know why a stranger, a Lakota warrior, would bother with her at all. When he noticed she was awake, he looked up, his eyes catching the firelight. He didn't smile or speak, just nodded once, as if to say she was safe, at least for now. He pointed toward the canteen and then to her mouth, a simple gesture. She reached for it, the cool metal pressing against her palm, and took a small sip. The water tasted clean, almost sweet, and it made her chest ache because it felt like kindness, and kindness was something she had forgotten existed. She wanted to ask him his name, but fear kept her quiet. He moved with such calm that it unsettled her, like he had nothing to prove, nothing to hide. When the wind blew, it lifted the feathers tied in his hair, and the faint glow of fire traced the curve of his jaw, the stillness of his face. Every so often he looked toward the plains, as if listening for something she could not hear. The night deepened, cool and strange, the stars bright enough to hurt her eyes. She lay back on the blanket he had spread for her, watching the shadows shift along his shoulders. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, its cry long and lonely. She thought of her father, her mother, the wagon burning, and then she thought of this man, who owed her nothing and yet had stayed. When sleep finally came, it was heavy and deep, filled with dreams of fire and his quiet eyes keeping the dark away. The days that followed blurred into long stretches of sky and wind, the kind of silence that could swallow a person whole. Evelyn walked behind Kohan at first, her steps clumsy, her body still weak, but with every mile, the trembling in her legs grew less. The plains opened wide before them, endless waves of grass bending under the wind. The horizon, a pale line that never seemed to move closer. Kohan said little, only pointed now and then, showing her how to read the land. He crouched beside dry earth and brushed away dust until a darker patch appeared, then dug with his hands until a small trickle of water seeped out. He cupped it in his palms, offering it to her, and she drank, watching him with wonder. He made it seem easy, as if the earth itself listened when he called. When they walked, he kept the wind behind them, tilting his chin toward the west and saying softly, "Wind back, easy." She repeated the words under her breath, the rhythm strange but steady. Sometimes he stopped suddenly, lifting a hand, and she froze beside him, heart thudding. He would tilt his head, listening, then point toward the hills where coyotes yipped, their cries rising and falling like laughter. "Not danger," he said once, voice low and careful. "They sing." She didn't know whether to believe him, but the sound no longer frightened her. They shared little food, dried meat from his pouch, a few roots he dug from the soil. At night, they built small fires, just enough to keep the chill away. She tried to ask where he was taking her, but he only tapped his chest and said, "Camp soon." His English was broken, but his meaning clear enough. She nodded, too tired to press. The silence between them was strange, not empty but full of things unsaid. She found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way he moved with purpose, how he seemed part of the land instead of passing through it. His calm unsettled her. It wasn't the cold stillness of fear, but something steadier, like he trusted the world in a way she never had. One afternoon, while resting beside a patch of wild sage, she tried to thank him. Her voice came rough, unused. "You saved me," she whispered, the words awkward on her tongue. Kohan looked at her, eyes thoughtful, and shook his head slowly. "You walk," he said, pointing to her feet. "You live," she wanted to answer, to tell him he didn't understand, that she hadn't walked toward life but away from everything she had lost. The words she wanted to say rose up in her chest, heavy and sharp. Home. It stuck there, like a stone she couldn't swallow. She turned away, blinking hard, pretending to study the sky. Kohan said nothing, only threw another stick into the fire. The crackle filled the silence between them, steady and kind. The trail curved toward the hills, where the grass grew taller and greener, and the air carried the smell of wood smoke. Evelyn followed Kohan through a narrow pass lined with rocks the color of rust. Her heart thudded as they came over the rise, and the world opened below. The camp spread across a small valley, circles of tipis, painted with symbols she didn't understand, smoke drifting from their tops into the blue sky. Children ran between them, their laughter carrying on the wind, and dogs barked, tails wagging, weaving around the horses that grazed along the stream. It might have been beautiful if she hadn't felt so out of place. When the first eyes turned toward her, she wanted to shrink into the ground. Women stopped grinding corn, men paused their work with the hides, and voices dropped to whispers. She could not understand their words, but she felt their meaning all the same. Kohan walked ahead with the same steady stride, his shoulders straight, his expression calm, as though he didn't notice the tension that followed them. Evelyn tried to match his pace, but her stomach tightened with every step. A small boy peeked out from behind a teepee and laughed before his mother pulled him back. Somewhere an old woman muttered something sharp, and the sound of it stung. They stopped near a large fire pit where several elders sat. One of them, a man with gray braids and a face carved by years of wind, looked at Kohan with questioning eyes. They spoke quickly, their voices low but firm. Evelyn caught the word "wasichu," repeated several times, and though she didn't know what it meant, she understood it wasn't kind. Kohan's tone stayed even, respectful but sure, and when the elder finally nodded, he motioned toward one of the women to step forward. The woman was tall, her hair streaked with silver, her expression unreadable. Kohan spoke to her briefly, then gestured for Evelyn to follow. The woman led her toward a small teepee near the edge of the camp. Evelyn hesitated, glancing back at Kohan, who gave a single nod. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and sage. A blanket was spread on the ground, and beside it sat a small bowl of water and a bundle of herbs. The woman pointed at her, then at the bowl, saying something soft. Evelyn understood enough to kneel and wash her face, the cool water running over her dusty skin. When she looked up, the woman's eyes had softened slightly. Outside, the camp had quieted, but the weight of their stares still pressed on her from every side. She could feel judgment like stones in her pockets, heavy and unshakable. Yet Kohan's calm presence steadied her. He stood nearby, speaking with the elder, his voice low and patient. She realized then that he wasn't ignoring the people's fear. He was absorbing it, shielding her from it, the only way he knew. And for the first time, she didn't feel like running. The woman who led Evelyn into the small tent spoke few English words, yet her presence filled the space with quiet authority. Her name was Witch Hung Pi, which Kohan later told her meant morning star. She was his father's sister, widowed many winters ago, and though her face carried deep lines, her eyes were bright as firelight. Inside the tent, the air smelled of smoke, hide, and wild sage. A pot hung above faint coals, and bundles of herbs lined the walls. Witch Hung Pi motioned for Evelyn to sit, then placed a wooden bowl in her lap and poured in a handful of yellow kernels. She picked up a flat stone and pressed it into Evelyn's hands, showing her how to grind in slow circles. The motion felt strange at first, her palms clumsy, but the rhythm soon began to soothe her. When Kohan left, the world outside grew still, and Evelyn's heart raced. She wasn't used to being alone among strangers, yet Witch Hung Pi's calm filled the silence. She hummed under her breath while working a hide stretched between wooden pegs, her voice low and warm. Now and then she pointed to an object, naming it in Lakota, waiting for Evelyn to repeat it. "We, son," she said, tapping her chest with a smile. "Tia, moon." Evelyn tried the sounds awkward and unsure, and the woman nodded approval. They spoke mostly with gestures, but somehow it was enough. Each morning began before dawn. Evelyn fetched water from the stream, her bare feet cold against the stones, while Witch Hung Pi stoked the fire and laid out the day's work. She learned to scrape hides until her arms ached, to grind corn until fine dust covered her hands, and to stitch seams along soft deerskin with a bone needle that pricked her fingers raw. The work was tiring, but it steadied her trembling hands, kept her from thinking too much. The rhythm of survival left little room for sorrow. At night, when her muscles burned, she sat beside the older woman near the fire, learning more words. She liked the sound of them, how they seemed to belong to the wind and water. Sometimes Witch Hung Pi told her stories, her voice rising and falling like a lullaby. Evelyn didn't understand the words, but she caught their tone, the shape of laughter and grief woven together. She realized that even in another language, pain and hope sounded the same. One evening, as she lay on her blanket, she felt her body relax in a way it hadn't in months. The soft murmur of the fire and the steady breathing of the woman beside her filled the dark. Her dreams came, but not with screams or fire this time. Only quiet images of corn stalks waving in sunlight, of water flowing over stones. When she woke, the light was gentle, the air cool, and for the first time since the raid, her chest didn't ache with fear. She had slept, truly slept, and the world felt almost kind again. The air that evening carried the scent of sage and sweetgrass, the smoke curling upward in thin ribbons that glowed gold against the fading sky. Evelyn stood beside Witch Hung Pi, near the center of the camp, her hands trembling though the air was calm. The people had gathered in a slow circle, faces warm from the firelight, their voices hushed. She didn't know what was happening exactly, only that the older woman had taken her by the hand at dusk and said softly, "Come." Kohan waited nearby, his eyes steady on her. neither urging nor explaining. She felt exposed beneath the weight of their gazes, unsure whether she was being honored or judged. Witch Hangpi spoke first, her voice carrying a rhythm that seemed older than words themselves. The language flowed like water over stones, gentle yet strong. Evelyn caught her own name once, spoken softly between the Lakota words, and then something that sounded like laughter rippled through the crowd. She glanced at Kohan, but he only nodded slightly, his mouth set in the faintest curve of a smile. The older woman reached for a small clay bowl filled with ashes and fragrant herbs, dipping her fingers into the mixture before touching Evelyn's forehead. The smell was sharp and clean, a scent of earth after rain. "You came from fire," Witch Hangpi said slowly, her English careful and accented. "But still bring light." She paused, then added a new word, one Evelyn repeated without knowing its meaning. "We yo pia," she said, and the people murmured in approval. The sound of it rolled softly through the air, filling the space between them. Evelyn didn't understand the full weight of the word, but she felt it settle in her chest like something she had been missing all her life. When Witch Hangpi finished speaking, the circle broke into quiet song. The voices rose and fell, low and steady, like wind through the tall grass. A child placed a handful of wildflowers at Evelyn's feet, and she knelt instinctively, touched by the simple gesture. She wanted to ask what the song meant, but she feared to break its spell. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the sound wash through her. For the first time, she felt not like a visitor, but like someone standing where she was meant to be. When the song faded, Witch Hangpi smiled and traced a finger over Evelyn's cheek. "Dawn woman," she said again in English, as if to make sure the meaning stayed. Evelyn's throat tightened. Dawn woman. The name felt like a promise, like something given instead of taken. She looked toward Kohan, who still stood near the edge of the firelight. His eyes met hers, calm but bright, and in them she saw something rare, pride mixed with understanding. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. The quiet between them said enough. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared one by one, Evelyn whispered her new name under her breath, testing how it sounded on her tongue, and for the first time, it felt like it belonged. The traders arrived just after noon, their wagons creaking under the weight of furs, tools, and barrels of flour. Dust rose behind their wheels, swirling through the warm air, and the camp gathered to greet them with the cautious curiosity reserved for outsiders. Evelyn watched from beside Witch Hangpi's tent, her hands still dusted with cornmeal. The traders spoke loudly, laughing too easily, their English rough and their Lakota worse. She could tell at once they did not belong to this world. Not really, though their smiles tried to claim otherwise. One of them, a gray, bearded man with eyes like faded glass, noticed her and tipped his hat, his gaze lingering a moment too long. "Didn't expect to see one of our own way out here," he said, half grinning. The words felt sharp in her ears, like a name she no longer answered to. Witch Hangpi stepped forward, saying something in Lakota that made the men glance at each other uneasily. They traded for meat and hides, their chatter restless, filling the quiet camp with noise. Evelyn tried to stay busy, tying bundles of herbs, but her hands shook. Then she heard it, a careless phrase spoken over a pipe. "Heard there's a search party out east," one man said. "Looking for a white woman taken by Indians near the Platte. They say her folks are offering a reward." The air left her lungs. She stood frozen, her heart slamming against her ribs. Taken. The word curled through her like poison. She could feel every eye in the camp flicker toward her, even if no one moved. She wanted to vanish, to fold into the earth. The men kept talking, unaware of the wound they had opened. "Reckon she's dead by now," another said, spitting into the dirt. Or worse. The laughter that followed scraped through her like sandpaper. She turned away, walking fast toward the stream, her vision blurring. The water shimmered under the sun, too bright to look at. She knelt beside it, her reflection trembling. The woman staring back at her was not the one they were searching for. That girl had died in the fire, in the screams, in the fear that clung like smoke. And yet her name still lived somewhere out there, being called by men who thought finding her would make them heroes. When Kohan found her, she was sitting in the shade, knees pulled to her chest. He didn't speak, only stood nearby, his presence steady as the trees. After a while she whispered, "They're looking for me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Kohan crouched beside her, eyes calm but knowing. "Do you wish to go?" he asked softly. She shook her head before she could think, tears spilling down her cheeks. "They'll never see me," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll only see what they expect." Kohan nodded once, not touching her, not trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. The silence stretched between them, heavy yet strangely kind, and she realized that sometimes the truest comfort was the one that asked for nothing at all. The sound of horses came first, distant but steady, like thunder rolling over the hills. Children stopped playing and ran to their mothers. Dogs barked, and men reached for their weapons. Evelyn stood outside Witch Hongpi's tent, her pulse quickening as dust rose along the horizon. Kohan appeared beside her, his face unreadable. "Soldiers?" he said quietly. The word chilled her. She thought of the traders, their careless talk, and her stomach twisted. The riders came into view, blue coats flashing in the sun, rifles glinting. They halted at the edge of the camp, the lead man stepping forward with practiced authority. He was young, maybe 30, his mustache trimmed neat, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Lieutenant Reed, United States Cavalry," he announced. His voice cut through the air, cold and sure. "We're looking for a woman by the name of Evelyn Hart." The sound of her name after so many months made her knees weaken. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then his gaze found her, and his face broke into something like relief. "Good God," he said softly. "It really is you." Kohan moved slightly, placing himself between her and the soldiers. The lieutenant frowned. "Step aside, son. She's coming with us." Kohan didn't move. The tension crackled like dry grass before lightning. Reed dismounted, approaching slowly, hands raised. "Miss Hart," he said, his tone gentler now, "your family's been searching for you. They thought you were dead. You don't belong here." The words struck deep, stirring something she didn't want to feel. The camp had gone silent. Every pair of eyes followed her, waiting. Evelyn's throat ached, her mind spinning. She tried to speak, but the soldiers' stares pinned her in place, heavy and possessive. She saw pity in some of their faces, disgust in others. Reed reached out as if to take her arm, but Kohan's hand shot up, gripping his wrist before it could touch her. For a second, no one breathed. Then the lieutenant jerked free, fury flashing across his face. "You'll regret that," he snapped. Evelyn stepped forward quickly, her voice shaking. "Please," she said. "No one hurt anyone." She turned to Reed. "You're mistaken. I don't need rescuing." The lieutenant blinked, taken aback. "Evelyn," he said slowly, as though speaking to a frightened child, "you don't know what you're saying. These people—" She cut him off. "These people saved me. They gave me shelter when no one else would." Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "You didn't even know I was alive." Reed's expression hardened. "You think you can live like this? You think they'll ever see you as one of them? You belong with your own." The words made her chest tighten, part of her still craving the safety he promised, but it felt false now, heavy with the same judgment that had once broken her. She looked at Kohan, who stood silent, his eyes steady and sad, and she understood he would not beg her to stay. The choice was hers alone. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but sure. "I already know where I belong." The soldiers took Kohan before the sun had fully set, their orders sharp, their movements practiced. Evelyn could only stand there, frozen, as they bound his wrists and led him toward the river. Someone shouted the words, "harboring a white captive," and the sound struck her like a whip. She wanted to speak, to tell them it wasn't true, that he had never kept her, never forced her, but the words tangled in her throat. When the lieutenant turned toward her, waiting for some sign of agreement, she said nothing. Her silence hung in the air like smoke, and Kohan, calm even in chains, looked at her once before they pushed him forward. That look followed her long after the soldiers dragged him out of sight. The camp grew quiet after dark. The men gathered around their fires, laughing and drinking, proud of what they thought was justice. Evelyn sat alone near one of the tents, her body still, her heart restless. Every laugh from the men twisted inside her like a blade. She could still see Kohan's face in the fading light, not angry, not afraid, only steady. The sound of the river carried on the wind, a slow murmur that pulled at her until she could no longer sit still. She slipped away when the guards changed watch, her bare feet silent on the dry grass. The moon hung low, its pale light washing over the camp and the water beyond. She found him near the bank, kneeling, his wrists tied behind him, his back straight. The ropes had rubbed his skin raw, and his breath came slow but even. For a moment she could only stand there, afraid to be seen, afraid of what she had done. Then she stepped forward, the ground cold beneath her toes. He looked up before she spoke, his eyes catching the moonlight. She dropped to her knees beside him, the tears already blurring her sight. "I didn't ask you to save me," she whispered. The words broke as they left her mouth. Kohan turned his head slightly, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't save you," he said. "You saved yourself." Something in her chest cracked wide open. She reached for the ropes, her trembling fingers brushing his hands. "I should have spoken," she said. "I should have told them." Kohan shook his head slowly. "They do not listen," he said. "You owe them nothing." She wanted to believe him, but guilt pressed down like weight on her lungs. The world she had once belonged to had turned him into a prisoner, and she had helped by staying silent. The river moved beside them, soft and endless. Evelyn pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her tears soaking the coarse fabric of his shirt. "I can't leave you here," she whispered. Kohan's voice was faint but certain. "Then don't." The words filled the air between them, simple and unbreakable. In that moment, she understood that freedom was not something given, it was something taken back, even if the cost was everything. The camp slept under a blanket of false peace. Fires burned low, rifles stacked carelessly near the guards who dozed beside them. Evelyn moved through the shadows like smoke, her breath shallow, her heart steady in its fear. The knife she'd stolen from the supply tent felt heavy in her hand, too sharp, too sure. Every step brought her closer to the river, to the man bound in the dark, and every sound of boots, shifting or horses snorting, made her pulse quicken. When she reached him, he was awake, his eyes reflecting the faint starlight. He didn't speak, only watched her as she knelt behind him and slid the blade through the ropes. The fibers parted with a soft snap, and his hands fell free. She pressed a finger to her lips, but he had already understood. They crept toward the line of horses tied along the edge of camp. One whinnied softly, tossing its head, but Evelyn's whisper calmed it. She chose the smallest, a chestnut mare with quick eyes, and Kohan swung onto its back, pulling her up behind him. For a heartbeat the world was still, and then the shout came, "They're loose!" The camp exploded in motion, boots pounding, metal clanging, men cursing into the night. Kohan kicked hard, and the horse leapt forward, tearing through the tall grass as rifle fire cracked behind them. The wind ripped through Evelyn's hair, stinging her face, but she didn't look back. The rhythm of the gallop drowned out everything, even fear. Sparks of gunfire flashed like brief stars in the dark, but the distance between them grew. Kohan rode low, his body one with the horse, his voice low and firm as he guided it through the ravine. The ground rose and fell beneath them, the air filled with dust and the scent of wild sage crushed under hooves. Evelyn clung to his waist, her fingers gripping tight, her heart pounding with the rhythm of escape. They rode through the night, the plains stretching wide and silent, the stars wheeling above like watchful eyes. The shouts behind them faded, until only the whisper of wind remained. Kohan slowed the horse near a cluster of rocks, letting it breathe. Evelyn leaned her head against his back, her lungs burning, her eyes wet. "They'll follow," she said. He nodded once. "Then we ride farther." She didn't ask where. She didn't care. All that mattered was the space between each breath, the feel of freedom in her chest. When dawn began to rise, the sky opened in colors she had never seen, pink and gold spilling across the land. The light caught the edges of Kohan's hair, turning it to fire, and the world seemed to pause. The fear, the chase, the noise of men shouting sin and shame behind them all fell away. The horizon glowed, endless and open, and Evelyn felt something she hadn't in years: hope. She wrapped her arms tighter around him, her cheek against his shoulder, and whispered, "We're home." The seasons turned like slow pages, each one softer than the last. The land that had once frightened Evelyn now welcomed her with open silence. She and Kohan built their lodge near a spring that sang through the grass even in the driest months, its banks lined with wildflowers that swayed like small flames in the wind. The roof was made of willow branches and hide, the walls packed tight with clay. It was simple, sturdy, warm. At dawn, smoke drifted from the small fire pit, carrying the scent of sage and wood. Evelyn rose early to grind herbs in a stone bowl, the rhythm steady, grounding her. Her hands, once trembling and pale, had grown brown and strong. The sound of Kohan's knife, shaping a bow beside the doorway, filled the air, a quiet music of work and peace. Their days followed the rhythm of the earth. When the sun was high, she gathered berries or mended the worn seams of their clothes, while Kohan hunted small game in the hills. At night they sat by the fire, sharing food and silence that spoke louder than words. Sometimes he would hum an old song, low and deep, and she would close her eyes, feeling the sound settle in her bones. The nightmares that had haunted her once had faded, replaced by dreams of wind and open sky. Travelers passed now and then, traders and wanderers moving between settlements. They brought news from the outside world, stories of soldiers, of towns rising near the railroad, of war and peace both breaking like storms. Some mentioned a rumor of a white woman who had vanished into Lakota country, who lived wild among them. Evelyn only smiled when she heard it, never confirming, never denying. The story belonged to whoever needed it. In the spring, they planted corn near the edge of the clearing. In summer, she hung herbs to dry above the doorway. In winter, snow piled against the lodge, muffling every sound until the world felt holy. Once, while they watched flakes fall through the smoke hole, Kohan took her hand and said in his careful English, "This is enough." She nodded, her throat too tight for words. Sometimes she thought of the life she had left behind, of names and faces blurred by distance. There was no anger anymore, only understanding. That world had built its fences from fear, and she had once believed them unbreakable. But out here, beneath the wide sky, there were no fences, only space to become something new. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, she stood by the spring and watched her reflection ripple in the water. The woman staring back was not lost, not frightened, but whole. Kohan's voice called from behind her, warm and steady, and she turned toward him, smiling. The lodge stood quiet against the fading light, its smoke rising into the vast blue. It was theirs, built from sky and earth, from love that asked for nothing but to remain. If this story left its mark on you, subscribe, like, and saddle up for more videos.